Hey folks, welcome back to True Crime Stories, where we cover the most thrilling true crime stories. Before we get going, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for me. Thanks. And now let's get into today's story.
Welcome to our deep dive. You sent a lot of material about this Cedar Ridge case, news articles, police reports, and even personal correspondence. You want the full story, huh? No stone unturned.
It's incredible what you've been able to dig up about this case. This is going to give us a lot to work with as we try to figure out what exactly went down in Cedar Ridge.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it, shall we? We're talking about Leonard Brooks's death, a prominent figure in Cedar Ridge. At first glance, it looked like an overdose. But there were a lot of rumors going around town that something wasn't quite right.
And as you dug deeper, you found a lot that backs up those suspicions, like that toxicology report you sent over. It shows that even though they found empty prescription bottles near his body, there weren't any of those drugs in his system. But they did find traces of fentanyl in his whiskey glass. Someone really wanted to make his death look accidental.
So that begs the question, who would have wanted Leonard Brooks dead? And more importantly, why?
Well, in the materials you sent over, it seems like there are quite a few people who might have had a reason. Let's start with Greg Morgan, Leonard's business partner. They were working together on a land development project that had been causing a lot of controversy.
Right, and you highlighted this news article where a local resident accused Leonard of trying to push the project through without thinking about the impact on the indigenous community's sacred land.
That's important because that's where Rachel Winters comes in. She's a newcomer to town with close ties to the indigenous community. And it seems like she wasn't afraid to stand up to Leonard and his plans.
Yeah, I can see why you were so interested in her interview transcript. She's definitely hiding something, don't you think? She gave such vague answers about her connection with Leonard, and those late-night calls she got right before he died. That's super suspicious.
It does seem like she knows more than she's saying. But we shouldn't jump to conclusions just yet. You also sent information about Jenna Mills. She was an employee who Leonard recently fired.
Oh, right. The classic disgruntled employee angle. The police reports mentioned she had access to tools and chemicals that she could have used to mess with Leonard's drink.
And she claimed she was home alone drinking the night of the festival, which isn't exactly a rock-solid alibi. Plus, you pointed out this forum post where someone claims they saw Jenna arguing with Leonard about unfair wages just a couple days before he died.
Right. So it wasn't just about getting fired. It was about feeling like she'd been treated unfairly. That definitely adds to her potential motive.
Absolutely. It suggests there was a lot of resentment building up, which might have pushed her to do something drastic. But we also have to consider Marcus Reynolds, Leonard's longtime friend and, well, rival.
And in the police report, you circled something interesting. It seems their rivalry wasn't just about business or their social standing. They were both interested in the same woman.
Talk about a classic love triangle with a deadly twist. But there's also the fact that Marcus would have benefited a lot from Leonard's death, both financially and in terms of his standing in the community. With Leonard out of the picture, he'd have a clear path to becoming the most powerful man in Cedar Ridge.
Okay, but you know what really grabbed my attention in all of this? The information about Tommy Green, the local historian who's obsessed with artifacts. At first, he seems like the least likely suspect, right?
I thought the same thing. But then you pointed out those handwritten notes you found tucked away in one of the police files. It mentioned that Leonard and Tommy had a huge argument just days before the festival about who owned a rare Native American talisman.
And that talisman, which is believed to be cursed, vanished the same night Leonard died. It's hard to believe that's just a coincidence, don't you think?
It's definitely a strange twist. Did the talisman have something to do with Leonard's death? Or is it a red herring? And if it is, why would anyone steal it?
I'm hooked. So we've got a whole bunch of potential suspects, each with their own secrets and reasons for wanting Leonard gone. What I want to know is, how did Sheriff Harlow and Emily Turner, the journalist who was investigating this whole thing, even begin to untangle this mess?
Well, you've given us a ton of material to work with in part 2. Forensic reports, interview transcripts, and witness statements. It's going to get really interesting from here.
All right, so now it's time to really get into the evidence you've sent about the Cedar Ridge case. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle, but the pieces are all mixed up and some might even be missing.
A puzzle with some pretty serious consequences. Remember, we left off talking about a group of suspects. Each of them had a reason to want Leonard gone, and they were all connected to him in some way. But just having a motive isn't enough to prove someone's guilty. We need solid evidence.
And that's where those forensic reports come into play. You marked a section about the analysis of Leonard's whiskey glass. It seems whoever put something in his drink knew exactly what they were doing.
Oh, yeah. The report says that the fentanyl was mixed into the whiskey perfectly. You couldn't even taste it. This wasn't some random, spur-of-the-moment thing. Whoever did it was experienced with drugs and how to use them.
Which makes you think about those rumors of a drug ring we talked about before. But what about things like fingerprints or DNA? Didn't they find anything like that?
Well, that's the interesting part. The report says the glass was completely wiped clean, except for Leonard's fingerprints, of course. It's almost as if they wanted to make sure there was absolutely no trace of them.
That's pretty smart.
Yes.
But they couldn't have thought of everything. What about the security footage from the festival? Did they catch anything helpful on camera?
You bet they did. Remember that timestamp you circled in the police log right before Leonard collapsed? Well, the footage from that time shows him arguing with Greg Morgan right outside the town hall.
Oh, that's right. And you pointed out that Greg looked really angry, almost threatening. It definitely makes him seem more suspicious.
Definitely. But there's something else you marked that I find even more interesting. Just a few minutes after that argument, Rachel Winters walks up to Leonard. They talk for a bit, and then she walks away looking pretty upset.
So she was with Leonard right before he died. That backs up what she said about trying to warn him about something. But what was it she wanted to tell him, and why did she seem so freaked out?
That's where those interview transcripts you sent are super important. Let's start with Greg Morgan's. You highlighted several spots where he kind of stumbles over his words and avoids answering directly.
Especially when the sheriff started asking about the land deal and Greg's financial problems. It's like he was trying to hide something.
He's definitely being evasive, which is suspicious, but it's not really proof of anything. But then there's that part you highlighted where things get a little more complicated. When they asked him where he was when Leonard died, Greg said he was with some friends.
But then you included a statement from one of those friends, and she says that Greg actually left the group for about half an hour. And guess what? That's the same half hour when Leonard was last seen alive.
Wow, that's a big hole in his alibi. So now let's look at Rachel Winters' interview. You pointed out how she wouldn't really talk about her past or her connection to Leonard.
It's true, she was being super careful about what she said. She did say she had a bad feeling that night, but she wouldn't explain why. And those weird phone calls she got are still a mystery.
Don't forget about those anonymous tips you found, too. They said that Rachel was seen near the storage unit where they later found Leonard's journal.
That does make you wonder how involved she really was. But we can't forget about Jenna Mills and Marcus Reynolds. You found some pretty interesting stuff in their interviews, too.
Jenna's interview was like an emotional roller coaster. She went from being angry to denying everything to seeming genuinely sad. It was all over the place. But there's one moment where she looks genuinely surprised when she learns about the fentanyl.
Do you think that means she wasn't the one who poisoned him?
Maybe. Remember, she was fired, not betrayed. Anger can make people do some crazy things, but it doesn't automatically mean they'd kill someone in cold blood.
So that leaves Marcus Reynolds. His interview is full of carefully worded answers. And it's pretty obvious he didn't like Leonard.
Yeah, and you highlighted that part where he says he doesn't know anything about the drug ring. But his body language tells a different story.
You think he was lying?
I think he's hiding something. Remember those financial records you sent? Well, they show a bunch of weird transactions between Marcus and an offshore account that's connected to drug trafficking.
Oh, wow. So Marcus might be involved in the drug ring, and he had a reason and a way to get rid of Leonard.
Yeah.
But what about Tommy Green? We haven't talked about his interview yet.
Well, his interview is the most confusing of all. He's all over the place, his story keeps changing, and he seems more worried about the missing talisman than about Leonard's death.
It's true, and he even said something super weird, like Leonard's death was fate's way of balancing the scales. What do you think he meant by that?
It's hard to say. Tommy is a man with a lot of secrets, and his obsession with that talisman is a little unsettling. He could just be a harmless weirdo, or he could be something much more dangerous.
This is a lot to process. We've got people with alibis that don't add up, suspicious money transfers, cryptic statements, and a missing, possibly cursed artifact. My head is spinning.
And don't forget about those anonymous tips, all the rumors about the drug ring, and the feeling that everyone in Cedar Ridge is walking on eggshells. It's like every time we try to pull on one thread, we just uncover another layer of mystery.
You know, I'm starting to think we're missing a key piece of the puzzle, something that would connect everything together.
You might be right. But remember, you also sent us some personal letters and things like that.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer is hidden in there somewhere.
You've got me even more curious now. Let's dig into those personal accounts, figure out what's going on with that talisman, and see if we can finally crack the Cedar Ridge case. We're back, and I gotta say, after going through all of that evidence, This Cedar Ridge case is even more twisted than I thought. It's like we're going in circles. Every time we think we're getting close, we hit another dead end.
Or maybe it's not a dead end. Maybe it's like a secret door that leads to a whole other part of the maze. Remember all those personal letters and emails you sent? Maybe those hold the key to figuring out what really happened to Leonard.
Yeah, you're right. We've been so focused on the official investigation that we haven't really looked at the personal side of things.
Mm.
So let's start with that letter you found. It was addressed to Leonard from his sister, right? The one he wasn't close to.
Yeah, this letter is really interesting because it gives us some insight into Leonard's past, something he never really talked about. His sister writes about some kind of family secret, a shadow, she calls it, that's been haunting them for generations. She even warns him that he can't escape the past forever.
It's almost like she knew something bad was going to happen. Do you think this family secret has something to do with his death?
It's definitely possible. You also included some emails between Leonard and Tommy Green, and it's clear they were both really interested in the town's history and all those Native American legends.
Especially the legend of that cursed talisman. In one of the emails, Leonard even says he feels like he's unleashed something he can't control. What do you think he meant by that?
It's pretty cryptic, but it sounds like he might have actually believed in the talisman's power, maybe even been afraid of it. And remember that diary entry you found? The one Rachel Winters wrote. She mentions talking to her grandmother, who warned her about the ancient spirits that protect the land.
So we've got this idea of some supernatural force at play, which honestly just makes this whole thing even creepier. But how does that connect to Leonard's murder?
I think we need to consider the possibility that the talisman wasn't just some historical relic. It might have had a much deeper, darker meaning to the people involved.
You're saying the talisman might have actually played a part in Leonard's death. But how? And who would have been able to use its power if it really is cursed?
Those are the big questions. But think about it. We've got Greg Morgan, totally driven by greed and willing to do whatever it takes to get ahead. Then there's Marcus Reynolds, ruthless and tied to the drug trade. And we can't forget Tommy Green, obsessed with the talisman and all those legends.
And Rachel Winters, too. She's definitely hiding something, and she might have had her own reasons for wanting Leonard out of the picture.
Right. It's hard to ignore the fact that all of them were connected to the talisman in some way, whether it was their ambitions, their fears, or their beliefs.
Okay, so let's say for a second that the talisman was involved in Leonard's death. Who do you think was behind it all?
That's the hardest question to answer. We've got evidence that points to each of them, but nothing that definitively proves anyone's guilt.
But we can't just give up there. What about the drug ring? Was that just a coincidence, or was it connected to the talisman and Leonard's death somehow?
I think it's all connected, but we're still missing those key pieces that would explain how. It's like we're looking at the back of a tapestry, we can see all the threads, but we don't know what the full picture looks like.
So where does that leave us? What did we learn from all of this digging into the Cedar Ridge case?
I think we've learned that sometimes the most fascinating mysteries are the ones that stay unsolved. We've uncovered secrets, looked at hidden motives, and explored the dark side of a town that seems so peaceful. But in the end, the truth about what happened to Leonard and the role of that talisman is still out there, and we have more questions now than we did when we started.
And maybe that's the scariest part of it all.
Yeah.
The idea that some secrets are buried too deep, some stories are never meant to be told. But that doesn't mean we should stop looking for answers, right?
Exactly. The search for the truth is a journey, not a destination. Even if we don't find all the answers, the act of searching can teach us a lot.
Well said. So to everyone listening out there, keep digging, keep asking questions, and never underestimate how powerful a good mystery can be. It can capture our imagination and make us question everything we thought we knew about the world.